Local News Sunday Edition.
Good morning and welcome to the KDPG Sunday Edition. I'm Ken Rice. The highest tribute to the dead is not grief, but gratitude. The thoughts of the great American playwright Thornton Wilder, perhaps best known for his play Our Town. This past week, Pittsburgh paid tribute to the former mayor of our town, Sophie Masloff, who died at the age of 96. People from so many parts of the community came together last Tuesday at in Squirrel Hill to express their own gratitude for Sophie Masloff's life and service. Harold Hayes was there.
It's not every day you see Rabbi Ronald Simons and Bishop David Zubik in the same processional.
America, America.
But that's just what you saw at Temple Sinai in Squirrel Hill as Pittsburgh paid tribute to Sophie Masloff, who never lost an election. Many who spoke knew why.
She was a down-to-earth Jewish grandmother, mingling with presidents and popes. Yet, she was always Pittsburgh to the core.
She knew almost block by block how this town was put together.
There were former mayors and former mayors' families in attendance. Among them, someone who was a child when Sophie Masloff was sworn in to replace his father, Mayor Richard Caligiuri, who died in 1988.
I learned about courage, and what everybody talked about today. She was a trailblazer, and she loved the citizens, and as you can tell today, we loved her, and we're going to miss her.
And another mayor who needed a fire truck got one from Sophie. Homestead bought it for $1.
I said, "Thank you, Mayor, for giving us a fire truck." She said, "Well, where's my dollar?"
Mayor Bill Peduto said, "You know why Sophie Masloff loved being mayor of the city? Because she loved Pittsburgh." From Squirrel Hill, Harold Hayes, KDKA TV News.
This morning, we'll remember Sophie Masloff by talking with three people whose lives she touched. A little later, Pittsburgh City Councilwoman Darlene Harris and retired Assistant Police Chief Therese Rocco will join us. But right now, a man who was perhaps the closest person to Sophie Masloff other than her family, her attorney, campaign treasurer, advisor, and good friend, Frederick Frank. David Tribben, executive editor of the Post-Gazette, as always, joins us for our discussion. Mr. Frank, thank you for joining us. Our sympathies to you.
Thank you.
How many years did you go back with Mayor Masloff?
45. For sure.
45 years.
For sure.
So you knew her before she was obviously mayor, before she was a council person.
That's right.
Before she was involved in elective politics.
Well, she was involved in elective politics. She was very active in the Democratic Party at that time, and she and Rita Kane were very active. And I don't know whether she was a state committee person already at that point, but she was deeply involved when I met her, and that's how I met her.
Okay, involved though behind the scenes.
That's right.
And even on city council, she was not known for being a particularly public. She wasn't really out there with she wasn't a very vociferous member of council, and yet as mayor, is it fair to say she transformed when she became mayor?
Well, she actually, when she was a member of City Council, she had one of the major responsibilities of that time, which was to put in place cable television. And that was something she did, and she did very well. I mean, she wasn't flamboyant, but she took an assignment on, and she always did it well, and her colleagues respected her. That's why she became president.
But she was on a city council, let's recall, that was filled with sort of larger-than-life characters.
That's true.
And she was one of the more reserved.
That's right, and she did not get into the fray.
Right, right. So how did she go from being Sophie Masloff, councilwoman, to Sophie Masloff, beloved mayor, and beloved, even greater, former mayor?
Really, Ken, I saw it as a seamless transition. I was with her both the morning and the afternoon when Mayor Caligiuri died, and she saw this being put forward to her. She saw it as a continuation of her responsibilities to the city, and she took the job on and she did it. I never saw a change in who she was. She didn't become pompous or filled with herself as a result of becoming mayor.
Mr. Frank, her ascension to the mayor's chair is much like Dianne Feinstein's in San Francisco.
Right.
And often we say about Mayor Masloff that she was real and authentic, and you knew her. Was there any difference between the public persona and the private persona? Most of us didn't see it.
Not really, except in our relationship, she could be quite stubborn with me. And she had a side of steel within her. They were very much like Prime Minister Golda Meir. There was this warm grandmotherly exterior, but inside was a person of steel and determination. And when she wanted something done, I had to do it the way she wanted it done.
That brings us to an interesting episode in her life and in your life that hasn't gotten a lot of attention. We're going back to 1984.
Right.
Russia was the Soviet Union at the time. How unusual was it for Americans to travel to the Soviet Union back then?
Well, it had been fairly frequent for some of us who were active in the Soviet Jewry movement to go there. I'd made a trip in 1981. But when Sophie went with me and Lou Borman, at that point, the State Department had advised us not to go and not to try to help the refuseniks. Because
these are Jewish citizens in the Soviet Union trying to emigrate.
That's right, who lost their jobs and were without any means of support.
And no exit visas.
And no exit visas. Because up until then, and this frequently happened, the people, those Americans who were helping them, would be called and interrogated by the Soviet authorities. But the Soviet authorities now, at that point, no longer allowed an American consulate to be present. So it was extremely dangerous. But she didn't cancel. And once she was there, she had to take on extraordinarily, really dangerous assignments, taking refuseniks right into the hard currency shops to fit them out with winter clothing. They weren't allowed to be in there. It was forbidden to bring them in there. But she did it. No assignment that she had to do was too dangerous. She just did it.
How was she communicating? Speaking Yiddish?
Well, most of these people spoke English.
Okay.
These were, and that was never a problem because they had been taught English in school.
We'll go from the kind of Steinbeck travels with Sophie back to Sophie here at home.
Right.
And what was her style outside of office while she was mayor?
I didn't really see any difference.
What did she do with her free time? What did she didn't. And did she have any?
She had very little free time. One of the things that always touched me was that her husband, Jack, to whom she was devoted, was not well during this time. In the midst of the campaign, she would go home, make him dinner to make sure that he had a good dinner, and although there were people helping her there, so she had very little free time.
And while in recent years we've measured a mayor's success by how often they show up, going back to the Woody Allen line, 85% of life is showing up, Mayor Masloff always showed up.
That's right. And no time when people wanted her there or at some particular event, she always went. And she certainly put her personal life in terms of any free time when she was mayor on the back burner.
People credit her for being the first to inspire the idea of a new ballpark for the Pirates. People talk about the cuts in the city wage tax that she was able to bring about, the street signs that went up before Sophie's administration. Many streets were not marked, and as a newcomer to the city myself in the late 80s, it was horrible getting around. Major changes. In your opinion, what's the biggest impact she had on Pittsburgh?
Well, I think if you want to look at the macro view of Sophie Masloff, it was that she became an example for many, and I think she was much more beloved after mayor than while she was there, much like Harry Truman, was that people saw her as a person of integrity, who put her duty to her city first, and I think that's really what people saw and respected that, and they felt this was the kind of leader ultimately they wanted.
Mr. Frank, a lot of the national leaders who became beloved after their time in office, and I'm thinking here of Harry Truman, as Ken mentioned, and Herbert Hoover, and also Jimmy Carter, were failures in office. But that is not the case with Mayor Masloff, is it?
Well, I can't really say one where I think that's probably true, but she, I did see, though, just a growing sense of appreciation every year as it went further and further and people just saw her. Ken, there's one thing about the Stadium Authority that I think is often forgotten.
And she remained a member until very recently.
Yeah,
right?
but I'm sorry.
And she told those stories incessantly.
Yeah, but the erection of the stadium, I misspoke. She put the idea before,
right?
But there was huge controversy.
Yes.
And I was with her in the midst of that. And we were having breakfast, and she said, "This is the right thing to do, but nothing else in the city is getting done because of the controversy. I have to take it off the table so we can move on." And she knew that she would be severely criticized for, so to speak, making a 180-degree reversal. But she felt she had to do it because that was what was important for the city, and how she might be criticized was not really of importance.
We spoke about Mayor Masloff's final public appearance. It was last October at this political satirical show that's put on every year, Off the Record. She was always there in the audience, even though she was always a target of good-natured ribbing. And last year at the time, you know, there's a grand jury investigating the city. Mayor Ravenstahl, there's the taint of scandal around his administration, and in the midst of that, they bring out on stage, for the first time ever at the show, Mayor Sophie Masloff. It reminded people of a different time. And I'm curious, what did you talk about with her after that?
Well, she always used to say, "I'm not so important. I'm not so beloved." And as we were driving home, I said to her that, now, you couldn't have had a warmer, greater reception. This is how the city feels about you. And then I'd get one of her responses like that. And she always used to like to tell the story about Golda Meir, where she would tell her generals, "Don't be so modest, you're not so great." She never viewed herself as an important person.
Well, she would have been forgiven if she fully enjoyed that moment. It was a triumph for her. Frederick, Frank, thank you so very much for sharing some of your memories. We'll take a break. When we come back, the tremendous impact that Mayor Sophie Masloff had on women in politics in Western Pennsylvania. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the KDPG Sunday edition. We're remembering the life of former Pittsburgh Mayor Sophie Masloff, who died 1 week ago today at the age of 96. In Pittsburgh, the path to political leadership for women has been difficult and sometimes painful, but that didn't deter Sophie Masloff, who began at the grassroots level, learning the ropes from the best, legendary Mayor and later Governor David L. Lawrence. She slowly rose through the ranks of the Democratic Party, and she had a special appreciation for other qualified women who sought to advance in their own professions. We're joined now by Darlene Harris, member of Pittsburgh City Council from the North Side, former president of Pittsburgh School Board, and retired Assistant Police Chief Therese Rocco, best known for her long and devoted work in the search for missing persons, including children. When Chief Rocco began her police career, women were few in police departments across the country, and it was Mayor Sophie Masloff who promoted then Commander Rocco to Assistant Chief, the first woman in Pittsburgh history to reach that position. Thank you both so much for joining us. When you think about Sophie Masloff, you think about her impact, not just on the city, but on politics and on women. What comes to your mind, Councilwoman Harris?
Just that she was so kind and really cared about the neighborhoods. That's when I met her. She was just like a grandmother.
And what was your personal relationship with her like, behind the scenes?
Well, we became very close as she was mayor, but I remember when I was on, before I was on Pittsburgh School Board, I was still in the community. I was running for school board, and we were at a park, and we were over by her car, and she says, "Just a minute." And she rolled up some money in her hand, and she handed it to me, and she says, "This is for school board." Shh. And when I looked, it was a $100 bill, and I thought, oh my God, I could never spend this. This came from Sophie, so I still have it to this day.
To this day, you have it.
Yes, I do.
And now, she was the first female Pittsburgh City Council president.
Yes.
Were you the second?
Yes.
I thought so, yeah. Now, at the time this was happening, when she became the first female council president, when she became the first female mayor, was it occurring to you how significant that was?
Yes, because, I mean, she has led the way for women. She truly has. She was there when women were really, it was never heard of to have a police chief or anyone to be in those areas. It was always men.
Well, let's talk about that with Chief Rocco. How did you find out that you were going to be promoted to assistant chief?
She took me to lunch. She called and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Really, nothing. According to, and I felt she wanted me to do something. She said, meet me for lunch, and we had lunch. And she said, it's about time. And I said, oh, what do you mean, Mayor? She said, I'm going to promote you to assistant chief. I said, wow. I said, you're not going to be liked, because they were always against a woman elevating to higher than what any of them were. And she said, I don't care who likes it. You deserve it. You've done an outstanding job for this city, and I am going to make you assistant chief of police. And I had to put my arms around her, and I cried. I said, I can't believe this. And she appointed me.
Go ahead, David.
Chief and Councilwoman, let me ask you both a question. There's a word that's always thrown around about Mayor Masloff that you wouldn't throw around about other women of her age. When Mrs. Clinton becomes a grandmother in a few months, no one who values his life or her life would refer to her as grandmotherly. We know that Mayor Masloff was tough and independent and decisive, and yet she's always described as grandmotherly. What is it about Mayor Masloff that's different in that way? And why so often does that word come through?
She just took the city as her family. She just was wonderful. Sort of like a grandmother, wanted to keep the city clean, the streets paved. She was doing those little things that everyone wants to have done in their neighborhoods.
Well, I'm sure that most of us remember our grandmothers. Unfortunately, I never met mine. However, we have to admit that grandmothers had more wisdom than any human being on this earth. And Sophie had wisdom. Not only wisdom, but common sense. And I think that is exactly what made her so outstanding. I don't think she ever felt insulted because they referred to her as a grandmother, because in essence, her mind was a grandmother's mind.
Councilwoman, when it comes to politicians, it's probably appropriate to say that common sense isn't. Can you think of any example where common sense for Mayor Masloff saved the day, made the day, changed the day?
I don't know. It just was. I think the city was at more peace. It was, the neighborhoods were just. It was her. It was just. The city was like her family.
And I think Mr. Frank, who was our earlier guest, would agree that Mrs. Masloff, Mayor Masloff, felt that the new Pittsburgh, the kind of semi-booming, youth-oriented, different Pittsburgh, is something that she was very proud of as well.
Yes, yes.
Well, she was for justice. Whether you liked her, which she did, if she thought it was the right thing to do, she did it. And this is what made her exceptional, I believe. She would take criticism, but if Sophie felt in her heart that she was doing the right thing, she felt good.
There's something telling about her, I think, in your description of that day that she told you she was going to promote you, saying it's about time, as if she relished the opportunity to stick it a little bit to the guys who had always enjoyed the power exclusively.
Definitely, I was, looked down, in essence, to the fact that I was a woman. I saw men come on the police department who didn't even have a third of experience or length of time on the force, become inspectors, sergeants, lieutenants, but I never got it any further. But I have to say that Muggsy Moore, who was the first black chief of police, did appoint me a commander. And Sophie and I were friends because we had a lot in common. We both came from the Hill District. I came from a very poor family. I lost my father when I was very young, And I wanted the job merely for the fact that I had to help support my family. Sophie knew that about me. And she also knew that I loved my work. And in spite of the fact that I was, all through the years, not given the equal opportunities that were given to the men, she knew that, but I hung on.
So this is 1989, you've just been promoted, you feared it would be perhaps not welcomed by all. What was the reaction from your peers in the police bureau?
I had a good relationship with the men because I helped them a lot. They relied on me for many things. But they really, thought, a woman, it's not a big thing for a woman to be a chief on Pittsburgh Police Department. In fact, I think I was the first woman in any big city like Pittsburgh. They had chiefs in small boroughs, but not in a city as equal to Pittsburgh.
Bring us up to date, Councilwoman Harris. These days, how are things in terms of gender balance in city politics and where the power truly lies?
Well, it's still, you still see the guys sometimes go to the side, but it's getting a lot better.
And in the police bureau, what's your impression from what you hear?
I have to say it's a lot better. She promoted.
We have an acting chief right now.
We have an acting chief, and she wasn't there too long before she consulted with me about Catherine McNeely, who was the commander today. She appointed Kathy, who was highly qualified to be a commander. She looked for quality. She would not just hire, particularly in the police department. I don't know if it's been known to people, but she did have a brother who was a police officer. I didn't know him. That was long before I got on. But he died. I think it was doing active duty. But she loved police. She had great respect for the police work that we did.
Councilwoman, are there any official plans or unofficial plans or great ideas to memorialize Mayor Masloff?
Well, I'm working on a proclamation for
When proclamations come and go, we do them for Thanksgiving
right.
And for national this and that day.
I don't know. We have a street named after her. I would like to have something for Sophie. I mean, she was the first woman, and she was so kind, and everyone loved her. She was great. So I haven't heard of anything as of this moment, but it would be nice.
Well, I think you've just got your assignment.
Our time is short, but in the remaining seconds that we have, throughout all this week, so many memories of Mayor Masloff have been shared because you knew her personally. Is there a side to her? Is there a story that you remember that you think people would enjoy hearing that hasn't already been out there?
Well, I do recall long before she became mayor, we were friends, and I was a very good friend of her friend, Rita Kane.
Yes.
And they were supposed to go to Atlantic City, and Rita became ill, and she called me and she said, would you go with Sophie? I can't remember in my whole lifetime having more fun. I shared a room with her. We laughed and carried on. We played the nickel machines, and I just loved, and I've never forgotten that. And that
Did
was
Mrs. Masloff come back to Pittsburgh with more money than she left, or with less? And how about you?
Less.
Less.
But
with
it
more
wasn't
laughs.
that much.
But more laughs.
Laughs. We had a marvelous time. We ate well, and she loved to eat.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to both of you. Nice to have you here. We'll take a break, back with some final thoughts in just a moment.
The KDKA Mobile Weather Lab. It's a 3.5-ton game changer in how we do weather. It's the most advanced weather tracking system on the planet. The KDKA Mobile Weather Lab, powered by your Western Pennsylvania Chevy dealers.
And thanks again to all of our guests. Great memories this morning of Mayor Sophie Masloff. We hope you can join us again next Sunday morning at 11:30 for the KDPG Sunday edition, following Face the Nation with Bob Schieffer. For David Shribman, I'm Ken Rice. Thanks for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.